Hello and welcome to the Office of Floor Culture. I want to share a few things which I find completely fundamental to the development of and maintenance of your general ranges of movement, focusing namely on the lower body. However, I don't want to be so specific about it because the concept I want to introduce you to is floor culture. Floor culture. What is floor culture? As it says, it's essentially developing a habit of being on the floor. Because it's not something that we want to focus on as being a specific exercise or a tool or a technique or a mobility routine. It's something that you want to develop a habit, and therefore it needs to be cultured in you in order for it to have lasting and noticeable effects. This doesn't mean that things such as routines like squat routines or large frame mobility tools for opening up your posterior chain or the larger ranges of your lower body, it's not to say that these are not effective or necessary. I truly believe that they will definitely help boost you towards your goals of having general movement freedom. However, we don't really want to be using a routine for the rest of our lives in order to maintain a range. A routine such as a squat routine is there, for want of a better phrase, it's like a kick up the ass routine. It's to get things going. Sometimes you will really need to bully out these particular ranges, and so those protocols and drills are there. However, if you really want to have the range, for example, of a squat position, or simply being able to sit on the floor, this is something that you have to practice daily until it's essentially habitual and it's cultured in you. The second idea of floor culture also comes from my experiences living and being associated with cultures that do have a floor culture firmly ingrained. So for example, as a child, my mother is from the Philippines. I visited there very often, and the squat is used quite regularly, quite normally, as a position essentially to be close to the floor. Not only is it used, for example, for waiting, or if you're gambling or sitting around a campfire, it's also used, of course, to use the toilet. In some cultures, more namely in the West, this is not only seen as strange, but frankly, some people find it disgusting. Whereas if you look at it from a physiological point of view, the effects of not having the digestive tract and the elimination tract in a certain position that is facilitated by the squat, the effects of what can happen from this are much more disgusting than actually using the squat as a toilet position. Also, when I lived in South Korea for some time, if you go into a restaurant in South Korea, very commonly you will see half of the tables are seated, as you see in the West, whereas the other half use low tables, not unlike something like this. And more than one occasion, I was there with an elderly friend, perhaps in their 60s or 70s, who found themselves quite comfortably able to sit on the floor for a period of hours during a meal, whereas one of my colleagues who was there had troubles even sitting for 5 minutes, and he had to be the Western guy who had to get a stool brought out for him so he could comfortably sit at the table. Now we can go into arguments about the anatomical advantages of some positions to certain cultures than others, but it's my experience that anyone can comfortably be brought to sit in a squat or sit on the floor. The time that it just takes to achieve that can just vary hugely from person to person, and of course, if it's to a certain extent where there are such rigid anatomical restrictions, this can be a different story. So what I want to share with you quite simply is how I implement this floor culture into my personal daily life, quite specifically in relation to sedentary work. Why? Because quite frankly, I'm on the laptop a minimum of 6 hours a day, up to 10 hours a day, perhaps even more. And other than my movement sessions in which I go out and I practice, movement is with me in my daily life. I cannot just sit in a chair as I have done in the past and sit in front of a laptop and not notice the tensions and the stresses that build up in the body, not only in that moment but ultimately over time. And what you'll find is these are the kinds of things that ultimately transfer into chronic conditions of back pain and many, many other things, as well as anatomical changes such as a kyphotic spine, in many cases an excessive anterior pelvic tilt, which, without getting too specific about which goes left and right and this, it essentially just causes problems for people. And in many cases, if you are experiencing moving through your full ranges on a daily basis, whether that's practicing or whether that's just being at home working, you will be more aware of these times when tension is starting to build up and potentially causing some problems in your body further down the line. But if we are not exploring these variety of positions, the chances are that you won't even notice that these problems are creeping up or have already crept up. And perhaps you might find yourself blaming something that you did at the gym, or for example, some kind of activity you did that injured your back, where perhaps your back, or wherever the affected area is, was perhaps not in great condition in the first place, and this is due to movement habits. So let's focus on those habits now. As you can see, I prefer a low table. It's not really, to certain dimensions. I mean, this one is, just as you can see here, if I put my fist to the floor, it's elbow height. And it was actually self-made. We just bought the top, and I just had these legs made by a friend of the family because I'm not so great with woodwork. But also, first thing is first, I have a yoga mat on the floor, and this provides a little bit of softness for the knees and the skin. However, I'm not one to shy away from the hard floor as well, because after all, the skin is something that also has to be conditioned with regards to spending time on the floor. So my first position that I'll just take you through is just sitting in a cross-legged position on the floor. Now, if you have issues with just sitting on a cross-legged position on the floor, and this is, extremely uncomfortable towards the ends of not being able to concentrate, then yes, you will most likely have to look into more specific routines and invest in those protocols to help build some range to at least be able to sit cross-legged on the floor. So from this particular point, there's a variety of positions that I'll go through. If I'm using this as my current setup, I have it set up at just a height so that the hands can just relax on the laptop here, and I'm not carrying too much tension in the shoulders. And this is something I'll always monitor in myself as well. Just checking that over time, the stresses of going through my workload, it's not that stressful, have not caused me on one side or the other to start tensing up. Monitor yourself now and then, and you might find, I can release that. And the same goes for the back and all the way through the body. So this is why I have this particular height. What I'll do from this place, I'm also available to change position. So here's some of the positions I might use. This is a very common one, just sitting cross-legged. And the other one is in a straddle position. Now, a straddle position, we're not being too specific here, we're not working on mobility, we're just finding a seated position. Again, if you cannot comfortably sit without having the feeling of falling back, this is something you're really going to have to take out and work on specifically. However, now that I have two positions, I have this position, when this gets tired, I come to this position. One of the other common positions I'll use is the squat position. So I'll bring myself into a squat. Now me personally, if I'm working away, I can find myself in this position for 20 minutes to half an hour and not really realize until my legs go numb. This might sound crazy, but it's really not. The legs don't fall off. It's kind of just, for me, a bodily warning system that, okay, it's time to change position. One of the other positions that I'll use is a fisherman squat. If you're not familiar with a fisherman squat, you do it in any case. One type of fisherman squat is like this. I just have the leg in front, and I've just brought it under, and I have the other leg here. Very commonly, you'll see people sitting like this. This is a floor contact fisherman squat. The other type of fisherman squat you can do as you're working away in your laptop, for example here, is then just to bring yourself up and sit on the back foot. Again, spending some time in this position Your foot will eventually go numb. Again, it does not fall off. You can trust me on that one. I still have 2 of them. But what it does mean is perhaps it's time for you to change to the other side. So you would then change to the other side here. The third position that's quite common at this particular level that I'll use is simply flat foot kneeling. Flat foot kneeling, I just have my feet together like this. You can also bring the toes over each other, it's no big deal. And I just sit in the position and I work like this. So to review those positions, the first one I use is just sitting. I'll spend some moments until it gets uncomfortable, or if I start feeling any numbness, if I've let it get away from me. I'll use this position. I'll also use the straddle position, such as this. I'll shift into a fisherman squat. I'll go from kneeling fisherman squat to floor contact fisherman squat. And then of course, I also have the normal squat. And it doesn't even have to be a flat foot squat. You can even be up on the toes like this. One note with the kneeling, if you have extreme restriction in plantar flexion, which is not common but not uncommon, this means that essentially you're unable to achieve completely straight foot like this. What it then looks like when you're sitting on the floor is that there's a gap here, and this can actually be quite painful, and you have to really steadily develop this. Again, this is a separate project you might want to take out and practice simply just sitting in this position, and that will do the job. This is just one thing that I want to get through to you as well, is that if you want to develop and maintain a certain range, especially within the lower body, you don't necessarily have to do loads of specialized routines in a special way with weight and bands in order to get a range. In fact, I encourage that this is not your main protocol, your main go-to when you think of mobility, for the reasons I've already said with regards to floor culture. Floor culture is a habit. It's a habit. It means something that you always maintain. A routine is something that you do temporarily, ultimately. You may do it for a while, but your range is something that you want available for your daily life. And my daily life, even though I'm practicing 4 to 6 hours a day, my daily life is not doing a squat routine or doing mobility work. More of my daily life is just living in this particular range, and this is what maintains and even develops it as well. And I can say that with particular regards to my pancake. My pancake is something I've worked on for a long time, so I'm able to get quite easily to the floor in a variety of leg angles. However, not many people are aware that most of this range came from during my work hours on the laptop. I would just sit and I would just work into the range like this, but the accumulation of hours, perhaps even days over time of being in this position, has contributed hugely to the ranges that I have available. So we've spoken about the table level here. I want to show you just some other tools that I use as well that are always in my floor culture practice for my home office. There is a time when I get a bit tired of being on the floor, and one thing that can happen to me personally is that I get some tightness in the right side of my lumbar spine because I do tend to lean towards one side. And if this starts to happen, it's time for me to sit on something. So what I always have is a box. This is a very, very simple box. You can buy it off the website for €499. It's actually a joke. You can get it for free wherever you want. You can make it yourself. And these boxes provide a variety of levels, which is something we'll get into in a moment, which is very, very important for establishing different stages of your floor culture as it develops. And then when you have a floor culture developed, to keep that floor culture varied in the positions that you're sitting in. So, for example, what will happen once I get tired, the yoga mat will come out of the way. I'll put the box down, and normally I take a cushion. I have a pile of cushions, always stacked near me, some cushions like this, and I'll just pop the cushion down here. Now, I'll just shift the camera up so you can see. Now that I have my cushion and my box on the floor, I can just work in this position, and as you see now, although I am sitting, I'm not in the position or the sitting position that you most commonly find yourself for the 8 hours that you're in the office for, which is a very, very restricted position. By restricted, I don't mean that this position specifically is bad. There is, after all, no specifically bad position that will do you harm. It depends on the amount of time that you spend in it. Therefore, in the West specifically, people most commonly are spending time seated with the knees above 90 degrees, which is why in many cases people lack strength actually in the below 90 degree position, because more often than not, they're not getting out of a chair like this. They're already here, and they're getting out without the need of having to go through an extended range of motion. So therefore, I recommend you, if you have a box, a nice box is one that when you have your feet on the floor, your knee angle comes to a bit below 90 degrees. It also allows for more space between your legs, so actually when you move forward, you're getting a bit of torquing in the hips, which actually really helps contribute towards the development of your hip mobility. One thing that you'll notice now is that because I'm sitting on this elevated surface, is that the laptop is quite low. So for me, this is quite uncomfortable, not only because my arms feel like they're pulling me down. I personally like to be up here and a bit rested with my arms, so my shoulders are more relaxed. My neck is also forced into a position down like this, and then what you can see, it's just kind of pulling me into this classic kyphotic position with the head jutted forward. The simple solution to this, I always keep a shoebox handy, or anything like a box here that's just light, which I can just pop under my laptop. Anything you have at home will be useful. So now that I pop this up here, what you'll see is I'm back at my favorite position. Actually, this is more of a favorite position for me because I've got the forearms rested on the knees, so the shoulders can relax a bit more, and the hands are just resting on the laptop. So I'm just working away, and this is now the position that I'll use. I'll always switch between these positions, being seated here, also taking the box away, taking myself to the floor, working on the floor again, moving this box here, tap, tap, tap away. One thing I also personally like to do with my stack of cushions that I have is also change my position from the textures. So the floor is obviously quite a very hard texture, even with a yoga mat. And the box itself is a very hard texture, but in all honesty, this is quite a soft cushion, and also being in the seated position is much more supported in the way that your weight is distributed, so it's not so heavy on your butt, basically. But if I have a stack of cushions, what I can do is get even deeper into the squat here, but still feel quite supported. And because it depends on your body fat, but if your seating bones are exposed, this can be quite uncomfortable to be sitting on the floor on. One thing I can also do with this, if I stack another cushion up here, is when I'm sitting and I'm working away on my laptop, I can now start thinking about working internal rotation of my hips. Now, what is he talking about? Now he's getting technical. Absolutely fine. Well, normally if you think about it, when people are working on their squat, the idea is that knees are coming out, so you have more space in the middle to sit in your squat. Whilst absolutely true, we also have to think about, if we're always working with this external rotation element, we do also have internal rotation of the legs. Now, what this means is that I can just lightly let my knees drop in, just like this. I'm not doing anything crazy. So if I'm going to be working on my laptop, I might be sitting like this, and I'll take this position for a moment. Now and then I'll just squeeze the knees together, and I'll just tap, tap, tap away and work like this. The position I've personally been working towards is one in which I've been bringing the cushions down. It's just seating in this position. However, it's something that you have to develop over time, which brings me to a very important point, which is I cannot spend so much time in that position. It hurts, it distracts me from my work. This is something you have to deal with. There is no way around it. You have to practice. What does this mean? This essentially means that you invite floor culture into your life as gently as possible, but you do it. You must do it. If it's something that you want to have, there will always be an initial stage of that practice in attaining that or developing that, which is going to be the most challenging. And whether it means that it distracts you from your work slightly and you feel uncomfortable, this is just your practice. What I personally advise then is firstly a mindset. The mindset is something that I've previously written about called the comfort myth. The comfort myth. And what is the comfort myth? It's quite simply the quite dominant ideology that one of the best things to strive for in life is comfort. The idea that I'm so comfortable that I do not need to move one muscle. This is the ideology of the lazy boy chair, and this is an antithesis to movement. It's completely contrary. We want to move. We don't want to be comfortable. Being comfortable in a position, the same position for a prolonged number of hours, over days, over weeks, over months, over years, this is something that causes issues. So what we try to develop is an understanding that you are moving from position to position to reduce how uncomfortable it is so that it's bearable. Until the point you don't even notice it anymore, you just think, oh, I'm a bit uncomfortable, I should change to the floor now, I'll change my position. But in all honesty, in the beginning, it will be very challenging, it will be distracting, and it will have to be deliberate action. I suggest that you start first of all with a box. If you have a box that's too low, you find yourself, oh, this is what I found in the street, a bigger box. This box, for example, takes me quite high, but in actual fact, I'm still much lower than what would be a standard chair. So I can work in my position here. Of course, with this one, what I can then do is place my other box under the laptop, the bigger one, and now again, I'm at my perfect working height. So with having these variety of levels available, I can essentially construct my own office. And this is one of the reasons that the popularity of things such as the standing desk, it's not really much of a change because you're still only going between two positions, standing and seated. But there are so many things in between. And standing isn't the issue when you have mobility restrictions. The mobility restrictions are through your ranges, most notably in the flexed positions, not in the extended positions, in the more flexed positions. So this is why we use the idea of floor culture, because in order to bring your center of mass closer to the floor, somewhere in the body you have to go through your range. And this is where it really comes to the crux of floor culture, is that it takes you daily through your ranges. Rather than I finish in the office and then in the evening I do some pancake work where I spend cumulatively perhaps 5 minutes time under tension with all of my sets put together, how about I move in and out of the pancake, in and out of the squat, in and out of the fisherman squat, standing up, sitting down, lying on the floor, over a period of 6 to 8 hours every single day. This is a valuable practice. This is a sustainable and lasting practice that will give you something truly worthwhile in return. So whilst I completely understand and appreciate that many of these things you may look at, and if you're a traditional office worker like I was myself for many years, think this is just not practical. I can't do this at work. I mean, even at home, it's a bit of a stretch. These are the changes that have to be made. There are no shortcuts. If you want to live dynamically, if you want to move dynamically and have ranges, you have to live dynamically, you have to move dynamically, and you have to move through your ranges. There is no other question about it. So the first challenge is less about doing these things, sitting in the positions and get everything set up. The first challenge is psychologically in your mind, changing your mind to more of a floor culture mindset. Perhaps speaking to your line manager or whoever it is at work that's responsible for your work area to say, hey, look, I'm suffering from quite bad back problems. I want to try this thing just for 1 month and see if it helps with my physical issues that are interfering with my productivity at work and interfering with my quality of life outside of work as well. You can share these things with your work colleagues, and I'm sure, of course, in the first few weeks, it might be a laughable thing. They'll be, look, see John in booth 4, what he's doing, living on the floor like a monkey. Well, John in booth 4 is doing something to help regain his ranges. So this is the advice that I offer you. If you work from home or you are a sedentary worker, if you want to keep your ranges alive and mitigate the effects of office work, one of the first steps is to change the environment of your office. Another very simple thing to have at home is a pull-up bar. I recommend everyone to have a hanging point in their house so they can just hang from it daily. If it's there, you will hang. If it's not there, you have no option. Just the same as when we start getting to the practicality of these things, if you don't have a box, if you don't have a low table, if you do have the insanely comfortable rolly chair that means you don't even have to get up off your backside, these are things that can be changed immediately. So, just to recap quickly some of the things we thought about. One of them is explaining why floor culture can be beneficial for you, and we looked at the comparisons with floor culture in some other cultures which quite notably have statistically lower rates of back pain in compared with the West. And the second idea we looked at was kind of practical things of how to sit on the floor and how to set up your office. And the third thing, which I really want to drive home, is the need to actively develop this floor culture in your own practices and so that it becomes a habit. Many of my students and many people who work with me from all walks of life and all levels are and have incorporated this into their lives, and immediately they see the benefits. It is uncomfortable in the first instance. It can feel a bit strange that you're living on the floor, and it can be very, very frustrating, and you may really feel like you want to jump on the sofa or back into the comfortable rolly stool. But I really encourage you to stick with these protocols for a minimum of 3 months. Yes, I said it, 3 months. This is the amount of time that I believe it takes for any habit to be developed. Even if you want to start smoking, you need to smoke continuously for about 3 months until you're really addicted. And likewise, if you want to quit smoking to the point of when you don't feel it so much that you need it, a proper cold turkey of 3 months is going to be needed, okay? Take this advice with you, practice it, and I promise you, sooner rather than later, you'll see the benefits in your everyday life and also your work productivity. Stay well, be well, and keep moving.